Good afternoon again, everyone, from Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. Again, this is Ibrahim Sundiata coming to you. And in the last week, I've been doing several things. One is working on a book called Nigger Lover about the man in North American, Caribbean, and West African history who probably liberated more Africans from captivity than anyone else ever did. I want to look into him. Who was he? Why have we forgotten him? And maybe why we have to forget him. The other thing that has occurred to me, and it's been a very busy week, and I'm going to come back to this. This is not something I'm finished with. About 20 years ago, when I was at Howard University, a student leader published in the student newspaper an article. And the article was about Brazil. And what he said was that he was organizing young groups, or groups of young African American men, college students, to come to Brazil, which was the earthly paradise, which was wonderful because it had all of these wonderful Brazilian women who were there for the taking. They were desirable, they were delectable, and they were omnipresent. In Brazil, there was a Beyonce on every corner, and you didn't need to go to Houston. And I remember this, I remember reading it. And one of the things that struck me, because I have a pretty good memory for detail, and so I'm reading this, and I remember this young man, not young anymore, but he wrote that the problem with the sisters at Howard is that they were worshiping much too much at the shrine of Colonel Sanders on Georgia Avenue. Now, I read this, luckily I was sitting down. I said, I don't believe it. That no one could say that. No one could say that at an HBCU with a large female undergraduate faculty and with many black female professors and with many black male professors and with a social conscience. So what I did was I read it. I found it away somewhere, and it's available. It's a public record. It's not, once you put it out there about those fat heifers worshiping at the shrine of Colonel Sanders on Georgia Avenue, it doesn't go away. I was appalled. I was shocked. I had been coming to Brazil for years, and I never heard anything like that. Well, a little later, I went to a conference of ASWAD, the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora, and the conference was in Rio. And a young black professor gave a paper in which she talked about groups of African American men. These were usually middle-aged men, because she had photographs. They were not delectable. They were not the greenest leaves on the trees. I guess these were, this was on their bucket list. And so there were organizations and companies, not organizations, travel agencies, Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, DC. And you could come on down to Brazil and get what you wanted. And one of the ads said if you didn't get, because it was a 12-day tour, if you didn't get 24 women in 12 days, you weren't a real man. And I remember sitting in this academic conference and thinking, my God, things have changed since my day. These things usually were not mentioned. I now find that there are 3 or 4 or more books on sex tourism in Brazil, some of it focusing on African Americans, which is something that I'm interested in. The reason is, I know younger people who belong to organizations and they talk about making money, and Brazil is a big money-making opportunity. You can come in here and cash in. This is gold rush country. You can come in and cash in, make a lot of money, and get on it. Well, African Americans have had these fantasies since the 1920s in various places. I'm not sure it's really going to happen, but good luck. But what strikes me is that over and over and over again, I see cases. I read about cases. There was a case earlier this year where a young man had a podcast, and the podcast was "Come On Down. You can be a passport brother, and your passport is the green, and there is not a Brazilian black woman who's not for sale. Not a one. Come on down." Well, he published this, he put this out on the internet. And then some sisters got wind of it. And as we say, they came for him. He stopped, he pulled back. He became very quiet. Then I read somewhere that he went to Thailand. And now he may be back in Brazil. I don't know. Never met the man, but he does exist as much as a newspaper. O Correio exists, which did the article on him with photographs and with descriptions. Now, in the last week, there was another episode where a man, an African American man, had gone to a tourist part of the city, and this is not particularly Afro-centric part of the city. There are no great centers of Afro religious thought, religion, whatever. There are no big African churches. There are no small tejeros to worship the orishas. But he went there because nice beaches, nice bars, I guess. And what happened was he had an affray with a young woman, a young working woman working her trade, which here is legal, which, as I said, I'm not approved. I'm not approved. I have nothing against it. It's legal. Maybe if it were legal other places, we wouldn't have this traffic coming all the way down here. A lot of beaches between here and Sarasota. Anyway, this man had an affray with this woman, physical affray with the woman. The woman had fled, gone to the police station, fled to the police station, and was upset that she had not been paid her money, which here is legal. The law was not on his side. He may have thought it was, but it wasn't. So then he went crazy. He masturbated in the police station in front of the policeman, which is Brazil, something you really shouldn't do. I don't think you should do this in Detroit. Or this guy was from Philadelphia. I don't even think you should do it there. I don't know where he thought he was or what he was doing. They say he may have been on substances, whatever. Now, he's just another episode, an isolated episode, perhaps. But there are, and I'm talking, the first episode I heard about was way back 30 years ago. Then I heard about others. Then I was asked by the Federal University of Brazil to review 4 books. And I said, well, I really don't want to be reviewing books about sex and tourism. Well, now I am going to review them. I'm going to read them. I think this is a serious topic. And I'm curious about why people would come so far. Why? When they can get supposedly the same thing so much closer to home. Now, there is the question. I spoke to someone who looked at me quizzically and gave me this is an African American man of a certain age, and said, well, it's a force of the market forces. What he meant was, it's cheaper. It's not, listen, you can go to Port-au-Prince. If you really want an Afro-diasporic sexual phantasmagoria of sex, there are a lot of places you can go before you get to northeastern Brazil. There is something else going on. If you really want to do this, there are other places you can go and spend your money and get your dollars. And as I go on and read these books, and I'm going to then write a review of what other people think of why you would have so many African Americans coming to a place that is pretty far away, pretty isolated, And what really is pulling them here? There are business opportunities for people not looking for sex at all. There are many people looking for business. And there are many people looking for those kinds of hookups, including marriage. And there are other people who have a kind of experience which seems to slosh around in the middle. It sloshes around in the middle, which could be fine. It's their choice. However, in the long term, I think this might backfire. I think, years ago there was a book called The Ugly American. And there were all kinds of stereotypes back in the 60s of the ugly American. The white American with a loud shirt who could spend 80 years in the country and never learn how to conjugate one verb, who was all on the make for honeys, which he could never get except by opening his wallet. And he became a joke. And he is a joke. And he still exists. And I know I'm going to have people saying, well, they do it too. Well, they do it too. The point is, they might do it, you might do it, but what are the consequences for them and what are the consequences for you? Are you going to be that welcomed in 20 years? Are you just going to be another ugly American? This time, an ugly American of a different hue. This is a discussion we are going to continue. And I want to thank my editor, Pedro Enrique, who has just been such a help and a godsend these weeks, and we're going to continue. But I would like to ask him if he has any questions he'd like to ask me.
So the first question, I would like to know why you think Americans are the ones coming to Brazil for sex tourism, like most Americans?
Well, I think it's a function of the ratio of the dollar to the real. When the dollar is very strong, you get much more for your buck. In Brazil is a very attractive place, a beautiful place, a magical place, a place with lots of history, a place with wonderful food. And so, regardless, Brazil attracts economically. It is not like going to a place where everything is going to cost much, much more. And so it is a place where there's a relative economic benefit. And as I've said, and this will be controversial, here in Brazil there's no prostitution. It's been abolished. It's called programa, and it's legal. Something that perhaps certain states besides, let's say, Nevada, in the United States, need to take a lesson from, as they've taken a lesson from, let's say, cannabis liberalization. Maybe the U.S. needs to catch up. So those are my two things I thought about. Things here might be legal, and things here might be cheaper.
How could we solve this scenario? What attitudes could lead to this problem becoming smaller and smaller?
Okay, yeah. Well, I think one of the things is to say, is it a problem? And I think for a lot of people it's not. What I mean is when I spoke to the middle-aged man, and he said it's just the market. What he was saying to me is, people come down here, they got their money, they spend their money, that's life. And that's going to happen. That's not going to go away. So there will be people who have been coming here, whatever hue, whatever color, they've been coming here for, generations. And they're going to continue to come. The thing is to develop a kind of respect for the people, understanding that this is not just a beach, this is a country, bigger than the U.S. without Alaska, that this is a country with a large Afro-Brazilian population, a population which was larger than the population which immigrated to North America.
Are there any other countries on the world that have the same problem, would you say?
Well, there have been countries that have had the same situations. I would say, well, they can be problems or situations. There's a country, Thailand, which has a thriving sex industry, and it's probably not going away. There are other places in Southeast Asia which have thriving industries. There are places which are extremely high-end, which advertise. If you look at the tourist ministry in the Seychelles, it will advertise. La Seychelloise. There's this wonderful woman who is African, East Indian, and French. The most exotic, the most beautiful creature on the face of the earth. But they also point out that to get there is going to cost you some money. They don't want low-rent tourists. Now, so all over the world, there are places where people go because it's economical. There are a few places where the governments themselves have taken it upon themselves that we have the most beautiful men or women, usually women, in the world, and that come and see them. And this is part of the allure. Right? Advertise this as Seychelles for a long time, and this is part of the allure. Very expensive to get to. Very expensive to go to a five-star hotel there, but supposedly paradise. Now, I don't think that's going to happen in places like Salvador or Rio, etc., and I don't think that's desirable. Simply, it would cut down on the number of people who visit. It would bring in probably a different kind of tourists, which doesn't mean that they would be any more respectful of the people who are here. But what is necessary is to have a respect, kind of code of respect for all kinds of people involved in these transactions, and also to remember that there are other kinds of jobs that the government and the state, meaning the state governments and the federal governments, can work on to supplement jobs in the sex industry. Not to get rid of them. I'm not a Puritan, and we can have that debate. Some people say, well, get rid of it. That's not where I'm coming from at all. But to supplement, very serious programs to supplement income, to find other kinds of jobs that are good paying jobs, that jobs with respect, without saying that we have to abolish sort of the sex tourism business which has grown up. And I'll give you an example. When I was young, which is a long time ago, or let's say, we won't go back to before I was born, but let's go back to around when I was born. There was a place called Singapore. Now, Singapore is an island. It was ethnically divided. A few years after I was born, there was a huge race riot there. Hundreds of people were killed. There were ethnic Malays, Chinese, and Indians. They didn't have one language. They didn't share the same food prohibitions, and they didn't share the same religion. There was almost nothing that bound these people together. And the main occupation in Singapore was repair of ships. Ships going through the Strait of Malacca, going from the Pacific into the Indian Ocean. It was a big port, and it was an important port. It was important in World War II, and it continued to be important. And as an ancillary industry was prostitution. Bugis Street in Singapore was famous in the seven seas. The seven seas. Look it up in old travel books, look it up in old travel journals, and look it up in old novels. Bugis Street was jumping. It made Times Square look like Sunday school. Because you had a big port, and you had very little other industries. It was not a place of manufacturing. today, I have relatives who go to Singapore and say, "My God, it's heaven! It's so clean, it's so wonderful. It's got full employment." Well, what happened is the government came up with plans, first fairly stringent plans that I don't always agree with, to clean the place up. And this was basically physically, but also to get certain kinds of people off the streets. But also then, if you're going to do that, you can always move people around and hide them, but you need to create an economy that can absorb people at different levels, And what happens is, if you can really build a strong economy with jobs at different levels, for people who what we want is universal literacy. What we want is people who have certain basic skills, but we also, in this situation, we want to be able to have the option to create for men and women, or women and some men, the option, more options. So this isn't the only option. And so we have one example from one place that was the hellhole of the seven seas. Is now one of the cleanest, most beautiful, and most stridently white shoe places in the world. And a place which is a bit hypocritical. Every year they have a huge gay cruise there. It's called the White Cruise. Thousands of gays cruise into Singapore for fun and frolic. And the government makes a lot of money. Also, in Singapore, homosexuality is illegal. That's called cleanup. With a little bit of hypocrisy. We need to think about that. I want to say goodbye to Pedro Enrique, my editor, and my guide, who is a person who knows the ins and outs and the ends of Salvador Bahia. I want to say again, thank you to all my friends in Salvador who talked to me about this topic and who will be talking to me about this topic. And we are planning a conference at some point on this topic. And so, until the next time, I bid you good day.